start by bringing up this recent poll from the Pew Research Center. This poll shows that for the first time, more Americans say that protecting gun rights is important than controlling gun ownership. You can see in the graph here that 52% of Americans say protecting gun rights is important compared to 46% of Americans who say that controlling gun ownership is important. This is a dramatic change from the 1990s when controlling gun ownership was more important to the American public. What do you think is driving the shift?
Well, I think there's several things that are driving. I mean, first of all, what it's related to is whether or not people think owning a gun makes them safer or not. You can look at a Gallup poll. In 2000, 35% of Americans thought owning a gun in the home made them safer. Now it's 63%. That's a huge change, and it parallels very closely with the change that you see in Pew over the same time in terms of whether people oppose more gun control or not. And I think there's several reasons for why that's the case. One is you're starting to get more news coverage about people using guns defensively. If you look during the 1990s or even around 2000 or so, you just couldn't find a story on defensive gun use any place on national news. I mean, people would hear thousands of stories about bad things that happen. Now, at least you have outlets like Fox, which every couple weeks or so will have some dramatic gun use story. Just a week ago, a mass public shooting was stopped in Chicago by somebody who had a concealed handgun permit. It's the second time in a year since they've started allowing permanent concealed handguns in Chicago that you've had what would have been a really horrible situation protected because somebody had a gun. And that happens all the time, and it's starting to get news coverage. The second reason is people are catching up with the research. If you look at all the research that's been done on concealed carry, for example, whether economists or criminologists, you'll find about 70% of the research finds that it reduces violent crime rates. And so I think people are catching up there. And the third thing is that all the predictions that gun control advocates made. So, for example, when the assault weapons ban ended in 2004, people like Michael Bloomberg were predicting that there'd be huge, massive increases in violent crime as a result of it. Well, violent crime's gone down. You know, when concealed carry laws get passed in different states, you constantly have heard predictions about the fact that there'd be blood in the streets, that permit holders would be behaving irresponsibly. In fact, what you have found is that permit holders are extremely law-abiding. They lose their permits for any reason at thousands or tens of thousands of 1 percentage point. You know, they're even more law-abiding than police officers, even though they're extremely law-abiding. And so I think those types of predictions have lost credibility with people. I mean, there's only so many times you can scream disaster is going to be occurring if you trust individuals to have guns and then not have that be the case.
You mentioned earlier the connection between gun ownership and safety, or the amount of crime that a community might experience. What is the most compelling evidence showing that owning a gun or having expanding gun ownership is linked to lower crime and safer homes?
Well, I'll give you one simple example, probably the simplest, and that is every place in the world that's tried to ban guns has seen an increase in murder rates and violent crime. I mean, we know in Washington, D.C. and Chicago here, the huge increases that we had after the bans on handguns that were there. But that's not the only place. Every place in the world, even island nations, which you think would be kind of the ideal experiment, because in Washington, D.C., they said, well, it really wasn't a fair experiment because people can still get guns from Maryland or Virginia. That doesn't really explain why it increased. It may explain why it didn't fall as much as they were originally predicting it would have. But you look around the world, whether it be island nations like Ireland or Jamaica or the UK, which have had bans, you've seen 5, 6, 9-fold increases in murder rates immediately after bans have occurred. You think one place in the world that's banned guns, you'd see a drop in murder rates, and you can't even point to one place that that's happened. So, I mean, I think that's probably the simplest thing. But, you know, as I say, there's lots of predictions that have been made, and I think that gradually affects the credibility of people who make claims otherwise.